I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where neighbors waved when you drove by and the smell of fresh-cut grass in summer felt like home. I wasn't the loudest girl in school, but I was a dreamer. I loved books, I loved stories, and I always believed one day I'd create a life full of meaning, full of love. And then I met David. He wasn't like the boys I grew up with. He was confident, smooth, and he knew exactly what to say to make me feel special. I still remember the first night we met at the county fair. He bought me cotton candy, teased me for my shy smile, and told me I deserved to be adored. No one had ever said that to me before, and I believed him. The first months were a whirlwind. He called me every night, opened every door, made me feel like I was the only girl in the world. When he asked me to marry him after a year, I didn't hesitate. I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale, but what I was really stepping into was a trap. The signs were there, even in the beginning. I just didn't want to see them. The first time, it was about me coming home late from work. I was 10 minutes late, 10 minutes. He told me he was worried, but the way he said it felt like an accusation. Another time, I bought a dress without asking him. He smiled in public, but later whispered in my ear, "Next time, ask me first." I brushed it off. He's protective, I told myself. He just loves me too much. Love doesn't make you feel small. Love doesn't silence you. Little by little, my world got smaller. My friends stopped calling because I always had an excuse. My parents saw me less and less. "We're just busy," I'd lie, smiling on the outside while my soul withered on the inside. By the time our first child was born, I wasn't Elena anymore. I was just his wife, his possession. He told me what to wear, who to see, what to say. If I disagreed with him, he'd cut me off mid-sentence, correcting me in front of everyone. And when we were alone, his words were knives. "You're nothing without me. No one will believe you. You can't survive on your own." And I believed him. But what no one ever saw were the nights I cried silently, staring at my sleeping children. The nights I whispered promises to them, promises that I would keep them safe, no matter what it cost me. I told myself I could endure a little longer for them, always for them. But inside me, something was changing. A seed was growing, a thought I was too afraid to speak out loud. One day, I will leave. One day, I will not be silent anymore. I used to think silence was weakness, that not speaking up meant I wasn't strong enough. But with David, silence became survival. The less I said, the less I provoked him. The less I resisted, the less he lashed out. Or so I thought. Because the truth is, nothing was ever enough. There were days when his anger was like a storm I could see coming. The tension in his jaw, the way he slammed doors just a little harder than usual, the way the air grew heavy before the thunder of his words. And then there were days when it came out of nowhere. A smile in the morning and rage by nightfall. Living with him was like living with fire. You never knew when you'd get warmth and when you'd get burned. I became good at hiding my thoughts, my opinions, even my bruises. I wore long sleeves in summer. I avoided mirrors because I didn't want to see the woman staring back at me, tired, hollow, unrecognizable. And yet, in public, I smiled. We both did. We played the part of the happy couple. He held my hand at church, kissed my cheek at parties. People told me I was lucky. "He's such a good provider," they said. "You're so fortunate." If only they knew. The worst part wasn't what he did to me. It was what he tried to make me believe about myself, that I was nothing, that I couldn't survive without him, that I was trapped. And for a long time, I believed it. But something inside me refused to die. I remember one night, after he had gone to bed, I walked into my daughter's room. She was only 5, her tiny chest rising and falling as she slept. I knelt by her bed and held her little hand in mine. In that moment, I realized she was watching me. Even if she didn't understand it yet, she was learning what love looked like, what marriage looked like, what a woman's place in the world looked like. And what was I teaching her? That women should stay silent? That love means fear? that survival means surrender. I couldn't let that be her story. So I made a promise that night, a silent promise. One day, I would find a way out, not just for me, but for her, for my children. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to scream. I wouldn't need to fight. My silence would speak louder than his violence ever could. That was the night the seed inside me truly took root. The night the silent revenge began, long before I even realized what form it would take. Because silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. It was power. It was the calm before the storm. They say abuse doesn't happen all at once. And they're right. It doesn't start with fists or screaming. It starts with little cuts, so small, you almost don't notice them. A comment here, a criticism there, a glance that makes you question yourself. That's how it was with David. At first, he told me what to wear. It's just too revealing, he'd say. Or, that color doesn't suit you. I thought he was being protective. I thought he cared. But soon, it wasn't just about my clothes. It was about my voice. If I disagreed with him in front of others, he would laugh, as if I was a child who didn't know any better. Later, when we were alone, the laugh would turn into rage. Don't ever embarrass me like that again. So I learned to keep quiet, to nod, to agree. Money became another chain. He controlled our bank accounts, every dollar I spent. If I bought something without asking, he made me feel guilty, like I was stealing from him, even though I worked too. You're lucky I take care of you, he'd say. Lucky. As if my survival depended on his generosity. And the terrifying part? He convinced me it did. The years blurred together in a haze of control. I lost touch with my friends. One by one, they stopped calling, and I stopped reaching out. Not because I didn't love them, but because it was easier than explaining why I couldn't meet. David doesn't like it when I'm out too much. That was the excuse I told myself. Over and over. Until even I believed it. My parents noticed, of course. Why don't you visit anymore? They asked. I smiled. We're just busy. But the truth was, I wasn't allowed. By the time our second child was born, I felt like a shadow of who I used to be. I avoided mirrors. I avoided conversations. I avoided myself. David had a way of breaking me down so subtly that I thought it was my fault. If he yelled, it was because I provoked him. If he hit the table, it was because I didn't listen. If he stopped talking to me for days, it was because I wasn't worth speaking to. And I believed it. For years, I believed it. But here's the thing about silence. It doesn't just crush you. It also teaches you to listen. And in those quiet moments, when the kids were asleep and David was gone, I started to hear a different voice, my own. It was faint at first, like a whisper, but it was there. This isn't love. This isn't forever. This isn't the end of your story. The more he tried to silence me, the louder that inner voice became. I couldn't ignore it. I wouldn't ignore it. I began keeping small records, little notes in a hidden notebook, tucked away where he'd never look. Times, dates, words he said, things he did. It wasn't much, but it was something. Something that told me I wasn't crazy. Something that reminded me, this is real. And one day, it might save me. I was still trapped, still afraid, still living in shadows. But a spark had been lit, and though David thought he had broken me, he hadn't realized. He had only planted the seed of my revenge. People often ask, why didn't you just leave? I used to ask myself the same thing. But when you live in fear for long enough, it doesn't feel like you have choices. Fear becomes the air you breathe. Control becomes normal. And when children are involved, it's no longer just about you. Every decision becomes heavier. David had a way of making me feel like leaving wasn't even an option. He told me no one would believe me, that I'd lose the kids, that without him, I'd have nothing. And part of me believed it, but another part, small, quiet, hidden, knew he was wrong. One night, after he had slammed the door so hard the walls shook, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark. The kids were asleep upstairs. My hands trembled as I held a pen. I opened my notebook, the one I had hidden inside a box of old recipes, and I began to write the date, the time, the words he had said. It wasn't much, just ink on paper. But for me, it was proof. Proof that what I was living through was real. Proof that I wasn't imagining it. Each entry felt like a drop of water falling into a glass. Small at first, but slowly, it filled. Over time, I began collecting more than just words: a photo of a bruise, a copy of a bank statement he didn't know I had, a voicemail where his anger cracked through the speaker. Little by little, I was building a case, not for him, not even for the courts, but for myself. Because if the day ever came when I had the courage to leave, I needed to know that I wasn't walking away empty-handed. There were days I felt strong, like maybe I could do it, maybe I could escape. And then there were days I felt like nothing but a shell. I remember standing in the bathroom one morning, brushing my teeth, when I caught my own reflection in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Tired eyes, forced smile, shoulders bent as if carrying a weight no one else could see. For a moment, I felt broken. But then, I felt angry. And that anger became my fuel. David never suspected a thing. He thought I was silent because I was weak. He thought my nods and smiles meant he had won. But what he didn't know was that my silence had become my weapon. Every time I held my tongue, I was listening. Every time I smiled, I was remembering. Every time I obeyed, I was preparing. The shadows I lived in were dark, but in that darkness, I found clarity. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to fight him on his terms. No, I was going to wait. I was going to gather my strength, piece by piece. And when the time came, I would show him that silence is not surrender. Silence is strategy. By the end of that year, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't live like this forever. I didn't know how, or when, or what it would look like. But I knew one day I would leave. And when I did, I wouldn't just walk away. I would take back everything he tried to steal from me. My voice, my dignity, my freedom. That was my promise, my secret, my silent revenge. I always thought there would be a moment, a clear, sharp line in the sand, when I'd finally say, enough. I didn't know when it would come. I didn't know what it would look like. But when it happened, I felt it deep in my bones. It was a Saturday evening. David had been drinking, something he did more often lately. The kids were in the living room, building a puzzle on the floor. I was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. At first it was the usual tension, his voice sharp, his mood sour. He complained about dinner, about the noise, about anything he could grasp. But then, it shifted. He slammed his glass on the table, the sound like a gunshot. The kids froze. My daughter looked up at me, her eyes wide, and then he shouted at her, at our little girl, for dropping one piece of the puzzle. I don't remember the exact words he used. Maybe I blocked them out. All I remember is her face, her lip trembling, her little hand shaking as she tried to pick up that puzzle piece. Something inside me snapped. I had endured his cruelty. I had swallowed his words. I had carried his rage, but I would not let him break her. That night, after I tucked the kids into bed, I sat alone in the dark. My notebook lay open in front of me. The pages were already filled with his anger, his control, his lies. But for the first time, I didn't just feel like a victim writing evidence. I felt like a soldier preparing for battle. And I knew the war had begun. The next morning, while David was still asleep, I slipped my phone into my pocket and quietly took pictures. The bruise on my daughter's arm, where he had grabbed her. The overturned chair from the night before. My hand shook as I pressed the button, but with every click, I felt stronger. Click, proof. Click, protection. Click, power. That day marked the turning point, not because I screamed at him, not because I fought back with fists or fury, but because I finally accepted the truth. I wasn't going to save this marriage. I was going to end it. From that moment on, every move I made had purpose. Every smile I gave him was strategy. Every yes, dear, was camouflage. He thought I was still his shadow, but in reality, I was becoming his storm. After that night, something inside me changed forever. I no longer woke up wondering how to keep David calm. I woke up wondering how to get out. Every routine moment, packing the kids' lunches, folding laundry, sitting across from him at dinner, became part of a secret mission. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing. I started small. Each time I went grocery shopping, I took a few extra dollars in cash. Not enough for him to notice, just a handful here and there. I hid the money inside an old coffee tin in the pantry, buried under bags of rice. Then I made copies of important documents, birth certificates, insurance papers, bank statements. Late at night, when David was asleep, I slipped them into a folder and hid it beneath the loose floorboard in our closet. Every hidden dollar, every photocopy, every note in my journal. It was a brick in the escape I was building. The scariest step came one rainy Thursday. David had left for work, and the kids were at school. My heart pounded as I dialed the number I had written down weeks earlier. A divorce lawyer recommended quietly by a neighbor, who had once whispered, "If you ever need help, call her." When the lawyer answered, my voice shook. "This is Elena. I need to talk about leaving my husband." There was silence on the other end, and then her calm, steady voice. "You're not alone. Come in tomorrow. We'll make a plan." For the first time in years, I felt hope. The next day, I sat in her office, my hands clutching the folder of evidence I had gathered. My notes, photos, bank copies, all of it spread across her desk like puzzle pieces of a nightmare. She looked at me, her eyes sharp but kind. "Elena, you have more than enough. Custody, property division, protection orders. You can win this, but you have to be ready. Once you file, there's no turning back." Her words made my stomach twist. No turning back. But then I thought of my daughter's trembling hands, my son's wide, frightened eyes, and I knew there was no turning back the moment he crossed that line with them. From then on, every day felt like walking on a wire. I acted the part of the obedient wife, smiling when he expected it, keeping quiet when he barked orders. But inside, I was counting down. Every smile was a step closer. Every silence was a weapon. He thought he still owned me, but really, I was slipping away, piece by piece, until one day, there would be nothing left for him to hold. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, my daughter whispered, "Mommy, why is Daddy always so mad?" I held her close, tears burning in my eyes. "One day, sweetheart," I whispered back, "he won't be mad anymore. One day, it will just be us, safe, happy." And in that moment, I silently vowed that day was coming, sooner than he could ever imagine. The turning point wasn't just about one fight. It wasn't just about bruises or broken words. It was about clarity. The moment I realized silence could be my power, not my prison. The moment I chose not just to endure, but to fight back in my own way. And though David thought he had me trapped, what he didn't know was this. I was already halfway out the door. They say war is loud. Explosions, gunfire, screaming. But my war was silent. On the outside, I looked the same. The quiet wife, the obedient mother, the shadow trailing behind her husband. But inside, I was building an army. The lawyer became my general. Every week, while David thought I was running errands or taking the kids to school, I met with her. We went over documents, discussed custody laws, and planned the timeline. "Patience," she reminded me. "The more evidence we have, the stronger your case will be." So I kept gathering. Receipts, emails, screenshots of his threatening texts. Every detail went into my growing arsenal. And the more I collected, the less afraid I became. At home, I was careful. I played the part so well it almost frightened me. When he demanded dinner, I served it with a smile. When he barked orders, I nodded. When he bragged about his control, I listened silently. He thought my silence meant defeat, but really, it was camouflage. There were moments, though, when the mask nearly slipped. One night, after he had stormed out in anger, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook. I caught myself smiling, not because of joy, but because of the quiet power I held in those pages. For the first time in years, I felt like I was winning. But wars are never without risk. One evening, David found me on the phone. "Who were you talking to?" he demanded. My heart raced. If he ever discovered I was meeting a lawyer, it could all collapse. So I lied. "Just my sister. She wanted a recipe." He narrowed his eyes, studying me. For a moment, I thought he could see right through the mask. But then he scoffed and walked away. I exhaled, my hands trembling. That was the moment I realized one wrong move, and everything could shatter. Still, I pressed on. I couldn't afford to stop. Not now. My lawyer advised me to open a separate bank account, secret, under my name only. Slowly, the coffee tin money made its way into it. Not much, but enough to know that one day, I'd stand on my own feet. I also began recording conversations, my phone hidden in my pocket as his voice turned sharp and cruel. Each word, each threat, captured forever. Every file saved on a password-protected drive. Every copy hidden in safe places he'd never look. Some nights, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had the strength to finish this war. But then I'd remember my daughter's question. Why is Daddy always so mad? And my son's silence, the way he clung to me when David yelled. And I knew. This wasn't just my fight. It was theirs too. The secret war wasn't about shouting or screaming. It was about patience. It was about strategy. It was about waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And every day, I came closer to that moment. David thought he was the king of his castle, but he didn't know his castle was already crumbling, brick by brick, secret by secret, smile by smile. I was tearing it down. When the papers were finally filed, I expected him to explode. And he did. The night he was served, David's face turned crimson, his fists clenched so tight I thought his knuckles would snap. "You think you can leave me?" he roared. "You're nothing without me, nothing!" I didn't answer. I just stood there, calm, silent, because for the first time, his rage didn't terrify me. It empowered me. The weeks that followed were chaos. David tried everything: sweet apologies one moment, venom the next. He swore he would change, then threatened to take the kids from me. But I had prepared for this. Every lie he told, I had a truth to counter it. Every threat, I had proof. Every performance he gave, I had already rehearsed my silence. The first day in court, I walked in with trembling hands but steady feet. David strutted beside his lawyer, oozing confidence. He truly believed his charm, his manipulation, his mask would save him. But masks can't survive under oath. When the judge asked about custody, his lawyer painted him as a loving husband, a devoted father. I didn't interrupt. I didn't shout. Instead, I quietly slid a folder across the table. Inside, photographs of bruises, screenshots of threatening texts, recordings of his voice, dripping with cruelty. The courtroom went silent as the judge leaned forward, reading, listening, watching. David's smile faltered. His lawyer tried to object, to spin the story. But evidence doesn't lie, and neither did I. I didn't need to embellish. I didn't need to scream. I simply answered each question with steady words, backed by undeniable proof. And with every piece of evidence revealed, I watched David shrink. The man who once towered over me at home was now cornered, powerless, exposed. At one point, he lost control. He slammed his hand against the table, shouting at the judge, shouting at me. "This is all lies." But the judge's expression was cold, unmoved. "Mr. Carter, sit down," he ordered. And for the first time in my life, someone with authority told him no. Day after day, the truth unfolded. My lawyer guided me, but most of all, it was the evidence, my silent, meticulous revenge, that spoke louder than anything else. When the custody ruling came, my heart nearly stopped. Full custody to the mother, the judge declared. And then, the property division, majority awarded to me. I felt my knees weaken, tears blur my vision. It was over. The war I had fought in silence. I had won. David glared at me across the courtroom, his eyes burning with hatred. But I didn't flinch. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, quiet and steady, the same way I had always been. Only this time my silence wasn't submission, it was victory. When I walked out of that courthouse, holding the hands of my children, I breathed a kind of air I hadn't tasted in years. Freedom. And though my voice had rarely been heard in that courtroom, my silence had spoken volumes. The strongest revenge isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. Sometimes, the strongest revenge is simply walking away with everything they tried to take from you. The day after the verdict, I woke up to silence. But it wasn't the suffocating silence I had known for years. This silence was different. It was peace. The house felt lighter without David's footsteps echoing through it. No doors slammed. No voices thundered. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator, the laughter of my children, the quiet rhythm of a home finally safe. For the first time in so long, I wasn't bracing myself for the next explosion. I was breathing, truly breathing. Adjusting to our new life wasn't simple. The children had questions. "Where's Daddy?" my son asked at first. I told them the truth, in words their small hearts could understand. Daddy was not being kind, and we all deserve to live where love is bigger than anger. They nodded slowly, and in time, I saw the tension fade from their little shoulders. They laughed more, slept better. Even their drawings changed, from dark scribbles to bright colors. As for me, I had to relearn who I was without fear. For years, I had been his wife, a shadow moving quietly, never stepping out of line, Now I was simply Elena, and I was free to decide what that meant. I went back to school part-time, picked up painting again, something I had abandoned years ago. Small things, maybe, but to me they were victories, brushstrokes of a new identity, notes of a song I had long forgotten. Sometimes people ask if I ever wanted to see David destroyed completely, to see him lose everything, to watch him suffer the way I had suffered. But the truth is, I didn't need that, because I had already won the moment I walked out of that courtroom, holding my children's hands. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't even visible to most people. It was in the custody papers that gave me back my children. It was in the property that secured our future. It was in every breath I took without fear. The strongest revenge was not screaming back. It was not fighting on his terms. It was silence. Silence that built strength. Silence that gathered evidence. Silence that ended in freedom. One evening, months later, I sat with my daughter on the porch. She leaned against me, watching the sunset, and whispered, "Mommy, you're not sad anymore." And she was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't sad. I was whole. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. I am no longer afraid. And if anyone ever doubts the power of silence, let my story be proof. Because silence isn't weakness. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes, silence is the loudest, most powerful revenge of all